In November 2018, Eleni Topaloudi planned to meet her new Facebook friend Alexander. The two had connected a week prior and evidently were hitting it off. But in the very moment that she met the man, something didn't seem quite right. And as the night progressed, that feeling of concern turned into one of absolute horror. Now, our story today holds most of the key ingredients to make you angry. We have prejudice, obnoxious privilege, and two very unsavory characters. In fact, this case was so bad that it enraged the nation of Greece and started new movements to enforce stronger laws. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. By the way, if true crime is your kind of thing, I post here once or twice a week, so if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing. And now with that said, please grab yourself a coffee. This is the case of Eleni Topaloudi. We're travelling to the southeastern tip of Europe, to a country yet to be covered here on Coffeehouse Crime. Welcome to the beautiful land of Greece, folks. Now, what do you think about when I say Greece? Perhaps it's their striking temples which rise above the cliffs of Athens. Maybe it's their pristine white homes nestled along the sea. Or perhaps it's just the beautiful weather that the country has to offer. Whatever it is, Greece is an undisputably gorgeous country. From the sprawling black sands of Santorini, to the laid-back party resorts of Mykonos, beauty can be found in almost every corner. Saying that, with the way this story goes, I can't say that's all of the time. Greece runs incredibly deep into human history, and in fact, it has been highly influential in the development of Western civilization as we know it. Not only is the country historically rich, but modern-day Greece has also become a very popular hotspot for tourists, and found in southern Europe, it has some of the best beaches found on the continent. This is, of course, scattered across its many islands, 226 to be exact. On one of the largest islands, the island of Rhodes, we find 21-year-old university student Eleni Topaloudi. As the daughter of Yannis and Kola Topaloudi, she was born in the border city of Didymotiko on the 15th of January 1997. Eleni was bright and playful and loved to have a good laugh. She had one of the most prominent personalities in any room, and her parents loved her and her younger brother immensely. Eleni was extremely intelligent too. Being an ambitious young woman, she never finished a job half-baked, and this ethos helped her achieve some of the best grades in school. To add to this, she was somewhat of a linguistic mastermind too. By the age of 18, she already knew how to speak Greek, English, and Arabic. Although she loved her family and was also worried about leaving them, the urge for independence came knocking on her door. Once she had graduated from high school, Eleni decided to move to the jaw-dropping island of Rhodes to study at Aegon University. It didn't take Eleni long to immerse herself in the island's way of living, which as a student mainly consisted of cosmopolitan vibes and cocktails. She quickly fell in love with the island's laid-back atmosphere and its friendly locals, and it didn't take her long to realise that she wanted to settle here forever. I mean, granted, she still loved her family dearly, but she knew deep down in her heart that home wasn't going to make her happy. She wanted to fly the nest, which I'm sure a lot of us understand. During her studies on the island, she went on to make many friends, and most of those who met her loved her personality. With her infectious smile and silly behaviour, most of those were attracted to her. When I say attract, I mean romantically too. With her dark brown hair and deep brown eyes, she caught the attention of many men while on the island. It was in November 2018 that Eleni was browsing Facebook when she was messaged by a 19-year-old Albanian man named Alexander Luka. Alexander was currently living on the island, and through these messages he built a rather friendly facade. He was outwardly nice to her, complimented her appearance, and was generally warm and friendly. He also kept himself in shape, and often attended local marathons. Many of these were to aid charities in need, which Eleni found rather charming. And so, the pair began to chat and share their interests. Eleni also talked about how much she loved travelling, and her love for Rhode Island. You can probably see where this is going. After a week of messaging on and off, the pair decided to meet up for a date. Nothing too big, it was only for a meal at a local kebab restaurant, generally seen as a form of fast food in Greece. And so, on November the 27th, 2018, the two were finally expected to meet. Alexander offered to pick her up from her apartment, which she politely accepted. Not that she was aware of it at the time, but meeting Alexander would end up costing her much more than the price of a meal out. It was a regular Tuesday evening, and being November in Greece, the weather was warm and relatively pleasant. Her date with Alexander was scheduled for 10 p.m, and the time was fast approaching. Right on time, Alexander arrived at her apartment in a pickup truck. He parked a short distance away before heading to the complex's front door. Surveillance cameras capture him pacing back and forth in front of her apartment, until she eventually exits the building to begin their first date. Alexander kissed her on the cheek before the two strolled towards his truck. This truck was nothing special, but what Eleni was more surprised about was that the two were not alone. Waiting for them in the third seat was another man, and Eleni was very confused by this. I mean, what kind of person brings his friend on a first date? Either way, this guy introduced himself as Manoli Kukura. I suppose that Alexander saw this date as much more casual than Eleni did. Either way, she accepted the new circumstances, and the three of them went to get kebabs. So, here is a bit of background on our unwelcomed guest. It turns out that Manoli Kukura is actually the son of a well-off and influential local family. The Kukura family own many shops, bars, restaurants, and real estate on Rhodes. And with this kind of money flying around, Manoli was used to getting his way. He often allowed cash to do most of the talking, and in short, he was a spoiled brat. To add to this, he had previously had a few run-ins with the law too. Most of these instances were either theft or aggravated assault, all of which were seemingly smoothed over by throwing money at the situation. It turns out that the truck Eleni now found herself in actually belonged to Manoli's father, and throughout the entire journey with both men, Manoli flexed his wealth and status. The man went on to tell Eleni that his family had a fancy summer house not too far from the restaurant in Lindos. He then suggested that, instead of sitting in a fast food joint, they should grab their food and then head to the summer house. The request seemed a little forward for a first encounter, but Manoli was a very persuasive man, and to add to this, Alexander seemed up for it too. Eleni reluctantly went along with the new idea, but, she wasn't quite sure what happened with her date with Alexander. It seemed to have entirely derailed. After picking up their food, the three of them made their way to the summer house, and Eleni, realizing she was in a weird situation, texted one of her friends to ask her to call her in an hour. She was clearly very uncomfortable with the situation she found herself in. However, not wanting to seem rude, she needed to find an excuse. Plotting an excuse to leave for a friend was the very best she could think of, and if the men were aware that someone else knew where she was, then surely they wouldn't try anything on. But when Eleni's friend rang her mobile phone just an hour later, there was no answer, and instead it went straight through to voicemail. This was unusual. Perhaps her phone had run out of battery, or maybe she had changed her mind about the call. In hindsight, her friend didn't fully understand Eleni's position, and after all, she had kept a message short and sweet. Sadly, neither of these two scenarios were the case, and in fact, the reason was far more sinister. And after going on her failed date, her radio silence extended throughout the night. She never returned home to her apartment. We're moving forward to the next morning. The date was November the 28th, 2018. Meandering along one of Rhodes' many cliffsides, two fishermen were on their way to do some morning fishing. But as the two were scouting for a suitable spot, a peculiar object caught their attention. Peering down the cliffside, the feeling of curiosity quickly descended into one of horror, and before they knew it, the two realized they were looking down at a human body. After calling local authorities, officers were dispatched to the scene immediately. Speaking to officers, the fishermen were surprised that the body hadn't washed away. The water was shallow this morning, and the tide very choppy. If this body had floated away overnight, it could have resulted in this person never being found. The body was that of a young woman, and tragically, she had been so savagely beaten that she was completely unrecognizable. The only distinguishing feature authorities could find was a single tattoo of a rose on the ankle. While they waited for forensic results to come back in, officers began questioning all the local tattoo parlors to see if they could find a match. It didn't take long for their efforts to pay off, as sadly, the body was identified to be Eleni Topaloudi. She had been thrown over the cliff the night prior. Eleni's family were notified, and as expected, they were both horrified and distraught to hear of the news. Investigations into how she wound up this way began immediately. It became evident that most of Eleni's wounds happened before her descent down the cliffside. She had multiple knife wounds, several strikes across her head, and was strangled. Her legs had also been tied together, and, adding a motive, it appeared that she had been sexually assaulted too. So, I'm sure you can already tell where this is going, but it didn't take long for officers to narrow down their suspects, and they did this by analysing surveillance footage outside of Eleni's home. After this information came to light, both Manoli and Alexander were finally arrested and taken into police custody. Probably no surprise, but our wealthy spoiled brat feigned innocence. However, Alexander, he crumbled. During police questioning, he confessed that both he and Manoli were the ones to blame. Recalling the night's events to authorities, Alexander claimed that after picking up their food, the three of them headed over to the Kukura summer home in Lindos, where they then collectively chilled on the roof, ate their kebabs, and had a couple of drinks. But shortly after this, their true intentions came to light. While there, the two men propositioned Eleni, asking her to sleep with both of them. Eleni was shocked by the proposal. She had only spoken to one of them for a week, and the other was still a complete stranger. She politely rejected the offer, but after refusing them, things suddenly turned dark and violent. The pair were not going to take no for an answer. As one man pulled out a knife and threatened Eleni, the other violently grabbed her. She fought back, but she was outnumbered. Manoli and Alexander then took her downstairs to a messy room, and in this room were two dirty mattresses. While here, Eleni was assaulted, and afterwards she was beaten around the head. When Eleni eventually regained consciousness, she once again gallantly fought back to save herself, and through her terror and pain, she told them that she would report them to the police. Manoli could not accept this. He was part of a well-known family, and if she were to shine a light on his monstrous self, both he and his family's reputations would be ruined. His violent intentions escalated. The only way to silence Eleni was to make sure she could no longer speak, or alternatively, if she disappeared. They tried to kill Eleni through strangulation, but after failing to do so, she was repeatedly struck in the head with an iron, but still Eleni refused to die. And after loading her into the truck, they drove to a remote cliffside and threw her into the murky water below. Eleni fell 10 meters into the shallow water barely deep enough to submerge her, and despite all that she'd endured this evening, she was still alive. Conscious but paralyzed and unable to swim or stand, she ultimately died slowly and painfully through drowning in the shallow ocean, and after disposing of Eleni, the two men then returned to the summer house. However, Manoli and Alexander were seriously stupid in covering up their crime. For one, it was evident that both of them had never cleaned in their lives before, as blood was present throughout the entire property. To add to this, after collecting all of her clothes and items, they then returned to the crime scene and threw all of it over the cliff's edge. Due to the slope and angle, and the wind's direction, most of these items were actually caught by the bushes along the way down. They had likely planned for these items, and unfortunately Eleni's body, to be swept out to sea. But neither of them had bothered to check the tide, and essentially, they'd littered the entire cliffside with evidence. It was, without a doubt, not a well thought out plan, and as we know, just the very next morning, two fishermen would find her body. After the summer house was cordoned off and inspected, and despite the feeble attempts to clean it, the property still clearly painted the night's grisly events. Eleni's blood was found in the kitchen, hallway, bathroom, and on the stairs. There were some unfortunate plot twists to our perpetrators too. Following their arrest, local news stations were incredibly xenophobic towards Alexander, and as they villainized him, many stations were quick to paint Manoli as an unwilling participant. This, of course, was far from the truth, and as I had said previously, Manoli already had several run-ins with the law, but they were always smoothed over by money and status. But even worse, over time it was discovered that some of these accusations were over sexual assault too. Once again, the Kukura family would throw a ton of money towards the legal situation, in ignorant hope it would provide Manoli with a more lenient sentence. Throughout the entire legal process, Alexander and Manoli blamed each other for Eleni's death. Each of them would claim that they unwittingly participated in the assault, murder, and cover-up. If this was the case for either of them, then why not call the police or disarm the offender? Their excuses made no sense to authorities. Now, unfortunately, the media and court would often favour Manoli over Alexander. This is due to a systemic xenophobic problem which is all too common in Greece. In court, it's actually very common for foreigners to be treated differently when compared to native Greeks. And during their trial, Manoli's defense team would paint Alexander as a foreigner who had corrupted the son of a well-meaning and influential family. This means that Alexander's previous offences came to light. In parallel with Manoli's former incidents, Alexander had multiple sexual assault charges under his name too. Unfortunately, sexism was a rather prevalent feature in this case. The media claimed that Eleni was, quote, a loose woman who asked for it, stating that, because she was not in a committed relationship, she flagrantly slept around. She was also painted as mentally unstable, and allegedly, she was the one who wanted the threesome. Manoli's defense team used this form of media coverage to further drive the innocence of their little baby boy, and to add to this, they tried to character assassinate Eleni. One thing I held back from saying earlier is that sadly, this was not the first time Eleni experienced sexual assault. She was a victim only 2 years prior. Horrifically, that assault was videotaped and then used as blackmail to keep Eleni silent. And after going to the police for help, she was actually advised to drop the case and save it to herself. Something I had never realised until covering this case, but the negligence of female safety in Greece is actually awful. And it's the reason why many sexual assault cases never make it to trial here. Believe it or not, but Manoli's baloney defense team also motioned to have no female members of the jury, believing that women could not be trusted to be impartial in this case. The Kokura family pulled every card they had to get their son off lightly. They engaged with the public, tried to enforce their side of the story, and even paid a doctor to prescribe Manoli with antidepressants to help make him seem vulnerable. Both Manoli and Alexander appeared to be smug throughout their trial, often seen smiling and laughing while in court, and even giving their finger to the camera crews. However, in the end, and after 2 years of court proceedings and deliberation, both Alexander and Manoli were sentenced to life in prison for Eleni's murder. Which might sound good on paper, but in Greece that can be as little as 10 years. They were also sentenced to 15 years for sexual assault, giving them a minimum sentence of 25 years behind bars. Considering both men already had altercations with the law, and their crimes against Eleni were so brutal, these sentences don't seem long enough. But to add to their 25-year sentences, leaked videos sent from prison show that both Alexander and Manoli are getting their own crimes committed against them behind bars. So take that information as you will. Both of these men have shown no remorse for their actions, and although the public and Eleni's family are waiting for some form of apology, they have yet to receive one. In honour of her death, Eleni's family created a campaign against femicide, as even to this day, it's not recognised as a crime in Greece. I think with Eleni's case being so gruesome, the public really rallied behind her story, and now there's a greater push more than ever to fight against femicide. Sadly, nothing can be done to bring Eleni back. She will never know of those who have rallied in her honour, or even that her own death and murder has been solved. Taken so abruptly and before her time, she was a bright young woman with a happy future ahead of her. A future cut short by 2 men who saw almost no value in her. Every year on her birthday, her family visit her grave to place flowers and pray that she is at peace. Something that, hopefully, they too will one day find. As for Manoli, and considering how long it'll take for him to be released from prison, he'll be lucky if Mummy and Daddy can still look after him. And while we're at it, can we make it a legal requirement to understand the text on your own shirt? Because this idiot clearly missed the memo. Hey there folks, thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. And thank you to DarkSideHasCookies13 for recommending this case. I know a lot of you are asking for more international cases, so if you do have a recommendation, please feel free to drop a comment or leave me an email. And you know what to do. As always, please share your thoughts in the comment section down below, and I'll see you again real soon for another video. But until we see each other again, please remember to look after yourselves and stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.